postpone the inevitable? Are you going to open up, or you think you know people? You believe in happily ever after, in blood ties, in coming home to peace? I used to believe that too, until the day my happily ever after turned into a nightmare, complete with a disgusting betrayal, debts that weren't mine, a husband who was a monster, and a daughter, well, a daughter who would make me question everything about a mother's love. And to think it all started with a simple cut on my hand and a bad day at work. Little did I know that bad was just the beginning of my free fall, a fall that would take me to rock bottom, to a place where I'd have to fight tooth and nail, not only for my life but for my daughter's, even if she had stabbed me in the back. Cut to the beginning of the story. You know that annoying, insistent noise old cars make? The kind that seems to get inside your head and stay there? Mine was exactly like that. Every single morning, the same metallic screech was the unofficial alarm clock, the kind of sound that already sets your nerves on edge before the first sip of coffee. Richard, I'd grumble, more to myself than to him, who, as usual, had his face buried in the newspaper, ignoring the world around him. This car won't last another week like this, I swear to God. The noise is unbearable. It sounds like it's going to fall apart at the next corner. The answer was always the same, a disinterested grunt, a vague uh-huh that meant absolutely nothing. Empty promises of, we'll look at it later, dear. I'm swamped with work were his standard excuse for everything, and for years, I swallowed it. How many times had I taken that old clunker to the mechanic? The noise would disappear for a few days, an irritatingly short truce, and then another one would return. Different, sometimes worse. It made me so angry, so helpless. At my job, as a warehouse supervisor for a logistics company, the day had already started with that tension in the air you feel when something big is about to happen. A rumor was circulating through the hallways, spreading like wildfire. A big shot, a major investor or client, was going to make a surprise visit to the company that day. For me, honestly, it was just one more thing to worry about. Another potential problem on a day that already looked complicated. My mind, in truth, was elsewhere. It was at home, with the bills that wouldn't add up, and with my daughter, Lily. At 22, Lily still hadn't found her way. She dreamed big, wanted the best of everything, but actually having to work for it, to get her hands dirty with a lesser job, oh, that wasn't for her. And I, like any mother, worried about her future, about our increasingly tight financial situation. Seeing Lily disheartened, lost, broke my heart. She never called Richard dad, even though he came into our lives when she was already a teenager. To Lily, he was always just Richard, her mother's husband, the man who took the place of Robert, my first husband, Lily's biological father, who died in that horrible car accident years ago. Precisely because of all this worry, for weeks I had been insisting, almost begging, Richard to find something for Lily at his accounting firm. Anything, Rich, I'd plead, almost every night, feeling like an idiot for having to ask so much. Part-time, as an assistant, anything for her to start, to feel like she's doing something with her life, to have her own money. She needs a chance, a push. He took a long time to give in, always with that talk about her lacking experience, the competitive market, that she needed to show more initiative, which, being painfully honest with myself, I knew had a grain of truth. Lily wasn't exactly a model of proactiveness. But you do anything for your child, right? In the end, he agreed, with a reluctance that, at the time, I interpreted as the normal concern of someone who didn't want to mix business with family. All right, Eleanor, he said with a tired sigh. I'll see what I can do for her, but she'll have to apply herself, you hear? Don't expect it to be easy. At the time, it seemed just like that. Meanwhile, back at my job, besides the tension of the big shots visit, I still had to deal with the constant, uncomfortable presence of Brenda. You know, that coworker who seems to be jealous of the very air you breathe, who looks you up and down with a fake little smile and eyes that seem to want to devour you. That was Brenda. I felt her hostility in my skin, but tried to ignore it, to focus on my tasks, which that day included supervising the receipt of a large, important shipment that was due to arrive, and, crucially, preparing for the potential meeting with said investor. If all went well, it could be my big break at the company. The accident was stupid. Quick, a second of carelessness, but it earned me excruciating pain and a serious problem. I was in the tool section of the warehouse, needing to get a specific toolbox that was on a very high shelf. Someone, and to this day I wonder who the unfortunate soul was, had placed the box poorly, right on the edge, completely unstable. When I stretched to pull it carefully, the heavy metal box lost its balance and came crashing down. In a reflex, I tried to catch it, but it was no use. It slipped, and the sharp metal corner grazed the palm of my right hand, opening a nasty, deep cut. The pain was immediate, sharp, the kind that makes you see stars for a second. I looked at my hand and blood began to gush, a vivid, warm red staining the shelf, dripping onto the concrete floor, soaking my blouse sleeve in seconds. I screamed, more from the shock and the sight of the blood than the pain itself at first. My colleagues came running, their faces a mixture of astonishment and concern. Someone quicker grabbed a random cloth and tied it around my hand, trying to staunch the blood, but it didn't help much. Eleanor, you need to go to the hospital. Right now, my boss said, his face pale, his voice firm. You can't stay like this. As they helped me, a bitter thought crossed my mind. There went my meeting with the big shot, my chance to impress. That's when fate, or chance, or whatever you call these things, started to play its tricks. I called an Uber through the app on my phone, my left hand trembling. The driver, who arrived in a few minutes, a young man with a friendly smile and calm eyes, named Lucas, was the one who took me to the emergency room. He even tried to make small talk on the way, asked what had happened, if the pain was very bad. But I was so nervous, my hand throbbing and my head spinning. I could barely answer properly. I was grateful when he sensed my state and drove the rest of the way in silence. Just the radio playing softly. The hospital was that environment nobody likes, right? Long, white corridors, with that strong disinfectant smell that turns your stomach. After a wait that seemed endless, filling out a form with my left hand, which was a struggle, I was finally called into an examination room. As I entered, I almost couldn't believe it. The doctor who attended me, despite his tired face and the deep dark circles that betrayed sleepless nights, looked incredibly familiar. Eleanor Martins? He asked, his eyes widening in recognition behind thin-rimmed glasses. David? David Evans? Is that really you? I stammered, the shock of recognition mixing with the throbbing pain in my hand. A wave of memories from our childhood, of afternoons playing in the same neighborhood before life took us on different paths to different cities, washed over me. We had completely lost touch. Wow, Eleanor, it's been ages, he exclaimed, a genuine, though visibly tired smile lighting up his face and softening the lines of exhaustion. But my God, what happened to your hand? He approached, and his professional demeanor replaced the initial surprise. Though his eyes still held the sparkle of reunion, he examined the cut with the familiarity of an old friend, but with the competence and gentleness of an experienced doctor. That's a nasty cut you've got there. As he prepared his materials to clean and stitch the wound, the conversation flowed, nostalgic and a bit surreal, a bizarre counterpoint to my physical pain. So you became a doctor, I commented, trying to focus on something other than my bloody hand. And you're a warehouse supervisor, from what I see on your chart. He smiled, picking up the file. It's my first day at this hospital. Can you believe it? Decided to make a change, you know? I left my career as a criminal investigator with the police. Criminal investigator? That genuinely surprised me. I remembered the David of my childhood, always so proper, so studious. You? But you were always so quiet. He laughed, a sound that felt familiar despite the years. Life takes many turns, Eleanor. I got tired of always arriving late after the damage was already done. I wanted to try something different, to help people before it was too late, if you know what I mean. His confession carried a weight, a sincerity that touched me. But what about you? Still as stubborn as ever? Stubborn as ever? Probably, I admitted, a small smile escaping despite the pain that was starting to intensify as the local anesthetic wore off. As he cleaned the wound with a gauze soaked in a liquid that stung like the devil, he looked at me with an affection that transcended the professional. You know, Eleanor, he said, his voice lower, almost intimate, even after all these years. And with this mangled hand, you're still the prettiest girl I've ever known. I felt my face flush, an unexpected warmth spreading through my chest, a silly teenage reaction that caught me off guard. Thank you, David. That's kind of you to say. But I held up my left hand, the gold wedding band Richard had given, me glinting under the cold light of the examination room. I'm married. He smiled, a mixture of melancholy and a spark of our old camaraderie. Ah, a detail. He paused, his eyes meeting mine. But technically, I knew you first, remember? He winked, and for an instant, I saw the mischievous boy with whom I used to share secrets. The lightness of the moment was a balm. Anyway, he continued, his tone now more serious, but still warm. I'm really glad to see you again, Eleanor, even under these circumstances. And look, if you need anything at all, don't hesitate to call me. Childhood friends are for that, aren't they? And it seems fate put us in the same place again for a reason. Thank you, David. Truly, I replied, feeling a sincerity I hadn't experienced in a long time. That unexpected reunion, his genuine kindness, were a small comfort on a day that was shaping up to be increasingly horrible. He finished suturing with a skill that belied his fatigue. All set, Eleanor, he said at the end, when he finished applying the dressing. Good as new, and don't disappear for another 20 years, okay? My number's on your file. Any problem with the stitches or anything else, give me a call. That man, I thought. As I left the examination room, my hand throbbing carried his own deep demons, an old bitterness that consumed him, but also a surprising kindness. I just had no idea yet that my own demons were just beginning to manifest, and that the promise of that rediscovered friend would be one of the few lifelines in an abyss I didn't even know existed. With my right hand now useless, bandaged, and throbbing horribly, the mere idea of trying to drive my old noisy car, which was parked at work, was completely absurd. I left it there, a problem for later, and called another Uber. And wouldn't you know it, one of those coincidences life sometimes throws at you, the app sent me the same driver. There was Lucas again, with his friendly smile. Well, look at that. Fate really wants us to bump into each other today, huh? He joked when he saw me. This time, thankfully, he was more discreet. I think he sensed my mood, the exhaustion and pain etched on my face, and didn't try to force conversation. On the way home, perhaps seeing my new bandage and remembering the state of my blouse earlier, he commented casually, trying to break the tense silence. You know, it's good that people donate blood, right? I'm a regular donor at the City Blood Bank. You never know when someone might need it, or when a small gesture can make a big difference. The observation seemed random at the time, a comment from a kind-hearted young man, but for some reason, those words stuck in my mind. I was grateful when he drove the rest of the way in silence, just the radio playing softly. I just wanted to get home, take a strong painkiller, throw myself into bed, and try to erase that day from my memory. I arrived home about 3 hours earlier than usual. The house was silent, but it was a different kind of silence than normal, a heavy, oppressive silence, filled with a strange tension I couldn't identify, but that made every hair on my body stand on end. And that's when I saw it. On the first step of the staircase leading to the second floor, tossed carelessly, was a men's shirt, one of those plaid flannel ones, made of cheap fabric and a pattern that Richard, with his refined and expensive taste, in clothes would never wear, not even to clean the floor. How strange, I thought. A wrinkle of worry forming on my forehead. A pang of foreboding began to settle in the pit of my stomach. I started up the stairs slowly, with a hesitation I didn't usually have in my own home, as if I were walking on eggshells, as if an internal alarm were sounding, warning of imminent danger. Halfway up the stairs, another piece of clothing, a denim skirt. I recognized it instantly as Lily's. Oh, of course, I tried to cling to a logical explanation, the only one my mind could formulate to avoid thinking the worst. My heart already beginning to beat erratically. It must be that new boyfriend of hers. The one she'd mentioned had terrible taste in clothes and was a bit older too. The explanation seemed to make some sense. It was the only one that did, but something didn't fit. A piece was out of place in this puzzle. Why would the clothes be scattered like that? Like a trail of breadcrumbs leading directly to the hallway of our bedroom. The master bedroom, mine and Richard's. I continued walking, almost like a sleepwalker, my feet feeling like they weighed a ton, following the sinister trail. Another pair of men's jeans crumpled on the floor. A silk blouse I knew was Lily's, one of her favorites. With each discarded piece of clothing, the knot in my throat tightened. The air seemed harder to breathe, heavier. And then I heard them. The sounds. They started low, almost whispered, muffled by the closed door of our bedroom. Moans. There was no mistaking them. And the constant, sickening rhythm of a bed banging rhythmically against the wall from our bedroom. The blood in my veins seemed to turn to ice. The air became thin, heavy, almost impossible to breathe. Those sounds, the muffled moans, the sickening, unmistakable rhythm of a bed hitting the wall, were coming from our bedroom, my bedroom, Richard's bedroom. The words, "No, it can't be," echoed in my mind like a desperate mantra, a futile last attempt to deny the brutal evidence my ears were picking up with frightening clarity. My good hand, my left, rose trembling towards the cold doorknob. My whole body was shaking, a mixture of fear, anger, and a growing nausea that threatened to make me collapse right there in the hallway. Each beat of my heart was a thunderclap in the tense silence of the house. Each second dragged on like an eternity. Please, God, let it be anything else, I pleaded in my thoughts. A forgotten movie on TV, a nightmare, anything but this. But the moans intensified, louder, more urgent, more explicit. There was no more room for doubt, for self-deception. The raw, disgusting reality was there, on the other side of that door, in a surge of pure desperation, fueled by a sudden adrenaline rush and a visceral need to face the horror head-on, to tear away the veil of lies. I turned the doorknob with a strength I didn't know I possessed, and pushed the bedroom door open with a crash. And what did I see? The television. The damn television, turned up to full volume. On the screen, a scene from one of those melodramatic, cheesy Mexican soap operas, with a couple grappling in exaggerated close-ups, the actors moaning and sighing as if the world were about to end the next minute. A sigh of relief so profound, so overwhelming, escaped my lungs that my legs gave way, almost sending me to the floor. For an instant, a blessed, glorious fraction of a second, I felt an indescribable relief, the kind that makes you want to laugh and cry hysterically at the same time. I felt like a complete idiot, paranoid. The tension that had consumed me drained from my body like dirty water down a drain. I almost laughed laughed at myself, at my fertile imagination that had played such a trick on me, making me visualize the worst of scenarios. I went to the TV, my knees still a little shaky, and turned off the set with the hand that still obeyed me, the sudden silence of the room seeming to amplify the sound of my own ragged, irregular breathing. But then, the clothes, the image of them, tossed haphazardly down the hallway like a trail of shame, flashed back into my mind with the clarity of a lightning bolt. They were still there. That wasn't a figment of my imagination. The momentary relief, so sweet and fleeting, began to quickly dissipate, like sand slipping through my fingers, giving way to a cold apprehension, a foreboding that resettled in the pit of my stomach with renewed force. And it was then, with the TV off in the deathly, oppressive silence of the room, that another sound emerged, clearer now, unmistakable, coming from the ajar door of our ensuite bathroom, the sound of the shower running, and laughter. Two distinct laughs muffled by the constant sound of falling water. One was male, deep, guttural, a laugh I knew like the palm of my injured hand, a laugh that had once lulled me on nights of love and complicity. Richard's laugh, and the other laugh was female, younger, with a crystalline, almost childlike tone that was terribly, unbearably familiar. Lily's laugh, my daughter. The blood that had started to circulate with some relief in my veins seemed to instantly freeze, again, transforming into millions of ice needles piercing me from within. The floor seemed to disappear beneath my feet. I walked, or rather dragged myself, to the bathroom door, each step weighing a ton, as if I were walking through quicksand towards my own execution. My ears were ringing, a sharp, persistent sound that drowned out all others. Is someone in there? My voice came out as a wisp, a hoarse, trembling whisper I barely recognized as my own. I didn't even know what I expected as an answer, if I expected anything at all. Maybe a denial, an excuse, anything that could postpone the inevitable. Are you going to open up or I didn't even need to finish the sentence. The bathroom door creaked open suddenly, and there they were, Richard and Lily, naked, completely naked, dripping water, their wet hair plastered to their bodies, their skin gleaming under the dim bathroom light, with casual, intimate little smiles on their faces, the smiles of people who have just shared a pleasurable secret, smiles that dissolved, froze, transformed into masks of panic and horror the exact instant they saw me standing therein, the doorway, like an apparition, a statue of indescribable shock and pain. My bandaged hand hung by my side like a dead, useless limb, a physical reminder of my vulnerability. And in that second, that exact, terrible second, my world didn't just collapse. It was obliterated, shattered into a million sharp pieces. And I, Eleanor, was shattered along with it. What happened immediately after that bathroom door opened is, to this day, a dark, confused stain in my memory, a blur of horror and disbelief. I think I screamed. I must have screamed a lot, a primal scream, torn from the depths of my soul, because my throat ached for days afterward, as if it had been ripped. I remember seeing the panic stamped on their wide eyes, their pathetic, instinctive attempt to cover themselves with their hands, as if a few inches of skin could hide the enormity of that sordid betrayal. Richard started babbling something, a flimsy, incoherent excuse that didn't even make sense to my stunned ears. Eleanor, it's not what you're thinking. He tried, his voice failing. Lily collapsed into tears, a convulsive, loud sob that, at that moment, didn't elicit a shred of pity from me. No compassion, only disgust. A deep, overwhelming, visceral disgust that churned my stomach. I don't know where I found the strength, but that night, I kicked them out of my room. Or rather, the room I had naively believed was ours. Get out of here! Both of you! Now! I think that's what I screamed, my voice hoarse, broken by pain and a fury I didn't know existed within me. Get out of my sight! They slunk out of the room, tripping over each other, still half naked, and holed it up in the guest room, I think. To be completely honest, I didn't want to know where they went, as long as they stayed far, far away from me. I spent the rest of that endless night wide awake, sitting in the old armchair in the living room, my body trembling uncontrollably, my bandaged hand throbbing as if it were on fire, my head spinning relentlessly, fruitlessly trying to process how my life, my family, everything I had built with so much effort, had transformed into this grotesque nightmare, this sick joke. Every detail of that first day came back to haunt me in an infinite loop. The accident at work, and the missed meeting, the reunion with David, the clothes scattered down the hallway like a prelude to horror, the muffled laughter, and the image of the two of them, Richard and Lily, together, emerging from that bathroom. It was a mental torture that seemed to have no end. In the days that followed, the hell that had settled in my house only seemed to deepen, as if I were truly falling into a dark, bottomless pit. The forced cohabitation under the same roof, while I had nowhere to go and tried to figure out what to do with my life, was a daily ordeal, a silent torture. Richard, with his usual audacity, tried to talk a few times, tried to explain himself with that cynical, manipulative air of someone who thinks he's very clever and believes he can fix any damage with empty words. It was a moment of weakness. Eleanor, he even dared to say, something unimportant. It won't happen again. Unimportant? Lily, for her part, hid in the corners of the house, avoided my gaze, cried softly in her room, but didn't have the decency, the courage to come to me and truly apologize, to look me in the eyes and face the consequences of what she had done. And me? I walked around the house like a ghost, a zombie fueled by cup after cup of strong coffee and a cold, silent rage that consumed me from within, day after day. That home, once my refuge, had become a prison, a minefield of painful memories and awkward glances. It was then, when I thought nothing could get worse, that the real bomb exploded, shattering what little sanity I had left. On a gray, cold morning, a few days after that fateful night, the doorbell rang. I dragged myself to the door, expecting to find the grocery delivery guy or some unimportant mail. But standing on my doorstep was a woman I had never seen before. An elegant, beautiful woman in her early 40s, but with eyes heavy with a deep sadness and a contained anger that I, unfortunately, recognized immediately, as it was the same feeling devouring me. She introduced herself with a firm voice, though tinged with emotion. "You must be Eleanor. I'm Clarissa." She then explained that she had been investigating Richard's financial activities and extramarital affairs for months, after accumulated suspicions and lies, and that her private investigation had finally led her to my address, proof of the double life he maintained. And then she dropped the sentence that finished demolishing my world. Clarissa, Richard's wife, the first, the official one, with whom he was still legally married, with whom he had built an entire life before crossing my path. He didn't just have another family, as I had begun to consider in my moments of despair. He had a legitimate family, and I, Eleanor, was the other woman, the mistress, the second, the fool he had deceived so sordidly and cruelly for all those years. Clarissa, with an impressive dignity despite her evident pain, told me she was there, at that moment, not to accuse me, but to warn me. She had just filed for divorce, and, more importantly, had obtained a restraining order against him for threats and aggressive behavior. Richard, the man I shared my bed with, was dangerous. The floor opened up beneath my feet once more, swallowing me into an even deeper abyss. Bigamy. That bastard, the man I loved or thought I loved, was a bigamist, a criminal, and the house of cards that was my life, already shaken by the betrayal with Lily, collapsed completely, turning to dust. With Clarissa's divorce proceedings coming to light, the financial situation, already not the best, became an absolute and complete nightmare. The house where we lived, which I naively believed was our asset, a home built together, was entirely in his name. And the debts? Oh, the debts. Bank loans with sky-high interest rates, credit cards maxed out, car loans, and other things I didn't even know existed. Everything, absolutely everything, was in my name. Richard, with his smooth talk, his concerned demeanor about the family finances, his silver-tongued salesmanship of illusions, had convinced me to sign all the papers over the years. "It's just a formality, dear," he used to say, with that falsely reassuring smile. To make things easier for us. Easier for him, of course, the scoundrel. To leave me destitute. In a matter of weeks, justice, or injustice in my case, was relentless. I lost the house. I was served an eviction notice with a humiliating deadline to remove my belongings and disappear. My name, which I had always cherished, always kept clean with so much sacrifice, ended up on credit blacklists, as dirty as mud, stained by Richard's irresponsibility and malice. I found myself, from one moment to the next, literally homeless, with nowhere to go, with one hand in front and the other behind, and that hand, my right, was still recovering from the deep cut and ached from the poorly done stitches. A constant, physical reminder of that day that marked the beginning of my end. Lily, amidst all this confusion and the scandal we became in the neighborhood, saw her world collapse along with mine. Richard, the man she had become involved with, and who was now exposed as a bigamist and criminal, wanted nothing more to do with her, treating her with the same cold contempt he reserved for me when his masks fell. Humiliated, without his financial or emotional support, and with our home about to be lost, she disappeared for a few days. She didn't contact me, and I, drowning in my own pain and anger, didn't actively seek her out either. Days later, the call from Mark, her ex-boyfriend, would reveal what had happened to her and drag me into a new level of nightmare. And me, I had no one. Friends, the few I thought I had were actually part of Richard's social circle, and they vanished like smoke the moment his castle began to crumble, leaving me completely alone, adrift in the eye of the storm. The despair was an icy knot in my throat, a feeling of sinking in quicksand with nothing to hold on to. No house, no money, no job, my soul in tatters, and my name dirtier than a pigsty. For a few days, I wandered like a lost soul, sleeping wherever I could, sometimes in the old car that, ironically, after being the source of so much morning irritation, was now my only shelter. shelter. I managed to retrieve it from the company parking lot before it was towed. A small, bitter victory. I ate what I could with the few coins I had left. Humiliation was a constant, bitter taste in my mouth. It was then, at rock bottom, when the idea of simply giving up on everything began to seem tempting, that I remembered Roxy, a friend from other times, from college, a vibrant, lively woman, but one I, in my arrogance and middle-class prejudices, had gradually distanced myself from because she had chosen a different path. Roxy was a stripper. I, with my narrow mindset, thought she was a bad influence, that she didn't fit into my respectable world. What cruel irony of fate. Roxy, the bad influence, was the only person who years ago, with a brutal honesty that offended me at the time, had tried to warn me about Richard. "That guy's no good, Eleanor," she had told me once, after a casual encounter where she met him. "He has the look of a predator, of someone who manipulates to get what he wants. Open your eyes." I, of course, hadn't wanted to listen. I defended Richard tooth and nail, distanced myself even further from Roxy, thinking she was jealous of my happiness. How blind I was. I swallowed all my pride, shame burning my face like fire, and looked for her number in my old, almost faded address book. I dialed, my hand trembling, my heart in my mouth, expecting her to tell me to go to hell, or not even remember me anymore. "Hello?" Her voice on the other end of the line was the same, unmistakable, husky, and full of energy, even after so many years. "Roxy, it's Eleanor. Remember me?" My voice came out as a wisp, choked with emotion and humiliation. There was a second of silence, and my heart almost stopped. But then she laughed, a hearty, familiar laugh. "Eleanor, you disappeared. Of course I remember. How long has it been, girl? What's up? Something happened? Your voice sounds weird." I broke down. I told her everything, between sobs and tears. The betrayal, the financial ruin, the eviction, the unemployment, the loneliness. I told her without filters, without mincing words, the shame pouring out along with the tears. On the other end of the line, Roxy listened to everything in silence, patiently. And when I finished, exhausted and empty, she didn't judge me, didn't criticize me, didn't say "I told you so." She just said with a calmness and firmness that warmed my soul, "Calm down, friend. Breathe deep. Richard is a scoundrel. Always. Has been. But you're going to get through this. Come over to the club where I work, the Blue Moon. We'll talk better, have some coffee. I can find you a place to stay in the back, and maybe even a gig if you don't mind the environment." A job at the club? My stomach churned just thinking about it. The image that came to mind was of myself, Eleanor, in my early 40s, trying to wiggle on a stage under colored lights. "A stripper, Roxy?" I couldn't. I stammered, fear and shame overwhelming me again. Roxy laughed again, but this time with affection. "Relax, crazy. That's not all there is to do here. We need waitresses too, to serve tables, attend to customers. It pays well. The tips are good. And the little room in the back is small, cramped, but it's yours until you get back on your feet and find something else. What do you say? I didn't have much choice, did I? It was either that, or continue sleeping in the car and starving. I accept, Roxy. Thank you. Thank you so much." The Blue Moon Club was a universe entirely separate from anything I had ever known. Neon lights flashed frantically. Loud electronic music made the floor tremble beneath my feet. The strong, sweet smell of alcohol, cigarette smoke, and a mixture of cheap and expensive perfumes. Men of all types, some well-dressed, others not so much, all with their eyes shining in the dim light, looking for fun, or perhaps something more. And the women, the dancers, with their statuesque bodies and very little clothing, moving with a sensuality and confidence that left me both fascinated and intimidated. I, Eleanor, who had always dreamed of a quiet, respectable life, was now there, in the midst of that whirlwind of sensations, wearing a tight waitress uniform, learning to balance trays full of expensive drinks, to dodge bolder hands, to smile even when I was a wreck inside. Roxy was a guardian angel. She taught me the tricks of the trade, protected me from some of the more abusive customers, gave me a roof over my head, hot food, and, most importantly, a friendly shoulder to cry on without being judged. The little room in the back was indeed small, barely fitting a bed and my few belongings, but it was a refuge, a safe place in the midst of the storm. But not everything was colored lights and female solidarity. There was the dark side of that world, the veiled exploitation, the constant objectification. And there was Vic, a regular at the club, an older man, in his late 50s, maybe 60, with a prominent belly, expensive clothes, and an air of someone who thought he owned the place. And in a way, he did. He spent rivers of money there every night, on drinks, on private dances, on generous tips for anyone who flattered him. From the first day I set foot in that club, Vic had his eye on me. Maybe because I was new, or because I didn't quite fit into that environment. I don't know. He was always calling me to his table, asking me to do a private strip, offering a large sum of money, an amount that, I confess, even tempted me in moments of greater financial desperation. I always refused, politely at first, but with increasing firmness as his insistence became more disgusting. exhausting. I'm not a dancer, Mr. Vic, I would reply, trying to maintain my composure. He didn't get it, or pretended not to. Sometimes when I hurried past with the tray, he would reach out and slap my butt, accompanied by a lewd smile and crude comments. I would turn purple with anger, with humiliation, but what could I do? The club manager and the bouncers, huge and mean-looking, just turned a blind eye. He spends a lot here, Eleanor. He's our best customer. Let it go, it's part of the job, they would tell me with a shrug. If it were any other nobody acting that way, he would have already been dragged out of the club by his collar. But Vic's money bought complacency, silence, and apparently the right to harass whomever he pleased. I learned to dodge him, to avoid his table, but it wasn't always possible. Every night at work was a small battle for my dignity as I tried to survive in this new, strange hell. Balancing trays and dodging Vic's advances, fate decided to trip me up again in the cruelest way possible. On a particularly busy night, my cell phone, which was vibrating in my apron pocket, rang insistently. I asked Roxy for a moment to answer it in a more private corner, near the emergency exit. It was an unknown number. I answered with a sense of foreboding. Hello, Eleanor. The voice on the other end was young, male, but filled with a desperation and instability that instantly sent a chill down my spine. Who's speaking? I asked, my heart already beginning to race. It's Mark. Remember me? Mark, Lily's ex. Mark, the young man Lily had dated for a while, a few years ago, the one with the weird taste in clothes. My stomach churned at the thought of what he might want after all this time, and after everything that had happened with Lily. Mark, what do you want? My voice came out more tremulous than I would have liked. Lily's here with me, Eleanor, he said, his voice cracking for a second, but with a strangely possessive tone that alerted me. After that scoundrel Richard kicked her out like trash, and she had nowhere to go, she didn't know what to do. She ended up coming to me, looking for some kind of shelter, or who knows what. But the main issue, Eleanor, is that Richard owes me, owes my family, and now he's going to pay. And if he doesn't pay, well, who knows what might happen to his precious daughter, the one he despised so much and who is now under my care? You're going to get the money, Eleanor, for Lily. My legs buckled, and I had to lean against the wall to keep from falling. Lily, with Mark, trapped, being used as a bargaining chip, probably terrified. I couldn't breathe. Richard isn't going to give you anything, Mark. I managed to stammer, my voice failing, the words stuck in my throat. He doesn't have anything anymore. I know he won't, Mark shouted into the phone, his voice now full of hatred and desperation. I've already talked to that bastard. Do you know what that monster told me, Eleanor? He laughed, a hysterical, broken laugh that sent shivers down my spine. He said he didn't care what happened to her. Said even you didn't care about her anymore. After everything. Said I could kill the girl, that it wouldn't make the slightest difference to him. Mark's words hit me like a punch to the stomach, knocking the little air I had left out of me. Richard, that soulless monster, capable of saying that about his own stepdaughter, the girl he watched grow up. The same one he had used and discarded. I saw the surprise in his eyes, then a kind of grim understanding. The old police officer's stance resurfacing in his gaze. His shoulders seemed to tense, to become more alert. Richard, that scoundrel, he muttered, more to himself, disgust evident in his voice. Then he focused on me, and the concern of a friend mixed with the resolve of someone used to handling crises. Eleanor, I told you earlier you could count on me, and that hasn't changed. Those weren't just empty words. He hesitated for a moment, and then an old, deep pain surfaced in his eyes. I lost my wife in childbirth with my son because I was stuck following a stupid procedure, useless orders. I was stuck at a roadblock while she needed me. I felt like the most useless, most cowardly man in the world that day. His eyes welled up for an instant. I don't want anyone else to feel that way, Eleanor. Helpless, desperate, while someone they love is in danger. He looked at the thick envelope of money I was clutching with trembling hands, then fixed his gaze on mine, with a determination I hadn't seen in him before, not even when he spoke of his police past. I'll help you. We're going to get your daughter back, whatever it takes. The firmness in his voice, the promise of a friend who already knew my struggles from times past, but now reinforced by his own pain and his desire for redemption, was what gave me the strength to go on. Those words from David, I'll help you. We're going to get your daughter back, whatever it takes, were like a balm to my wounded soul, a small lifeboat in the ocean of despair I was drowning in. For the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope, the feeling that I was no longer completely alone in this fight. We left the hospital and went to his car, an older model, but well-maintained. In the dimly lit parking lot, under the yellowish, flickering light of a lamppost, we began to hastily sketch out a plan. Or rather, he began to sketch it out, and I tried to keep up. my head still spinning from everything that had happened. His experience as a police officer was evident. He asked direct, objective questions. Is Mark armed? Did he mention being with anyone else? Did he seem to be under the influence of any drugs? Do you have any idea where he might be holding Lily? I answered as best I could. I told him about Mark's trembling, possessive voice, the desperation in his words, the mention that Richard owed his family, and how Lily had ended up with him. David listened intently, his jaw clenched, his eyes focused. He's acting out of desperation and revenge, Eleanor, and he's using Lily as a shield and a bargaining chip. That's the most dangerous kind, because it's unpredictable, he concluded, his voice serious. We can't risk a direct confrontation if he's armed and has Lily hostage. We need to take him by surprise, or create a situation where he feels in control, but where we actually are. It was then that my cell phone, which I had retrieved from the club floor, vibrated in my pocket. It was a text from an unknown number. Mark. The message was short and blunt. Abandoned warehouse in the port area, Doc. Street number 14. Bring the money in an hour. Alone. No cops, or the girl's dead. My heart leaped. They were close, and time was running out. I showed the message to David. He frowned thoughtfully. Port area. I know it. Lots of abandoned warehouses, easy to hide, easy to set up an ambush. He wants you to go alone, which is too risky. He drummed his fingers on the steering wheel for a moment. Okay, here's what we'll do. You go, but I'll be close. Very close. I'll go in first. Without him noticing, try to locate Lily, assess the situation. You arrive a few minutes later with the money in plain sight. Try to buy time, negotiate, keep him talking. When I give a signal, or if things get tight, I'll move in. The plan was risky, but it was the only one we had. David still had an old pair of handcuffs in the car's glove compartment. Old habit, he said with a tired half smile, and a powerful flashlight. He didn't have a gun, which made me even more apprehensive, but he assured me he would know how to act. I trusted him. I had no other choice. The drive to the port area was the longest, most silent of my life, even though it only lasted about 20 minutes. The tension inside the car was palpable, almost solid. I prayed silently, asking God, the universe, any higher power that might be listening, for Lily to be okay, for all of this to end soon. David drove with a calmness and concentration that contrasted sharply with the turmoil of fear and anguish, consuming me. He seemed to have reverted to the police officer he once was, focused, alert, ready for action. We reached Dock Street, a dark, deserted, and frightening place. Huge, dilapidated warehouses lined both sides of the poorly lit street, their broken windows like empty eyes staring at us in the darkness. David parked the car a safe distance from number 14, a particularly large warehouse with an even more sinister air than the others. Wait here for about 10 minutes, he said, his voice low and firm. Then go to the main entrance. Make sure the bag with the money is clearly visible. If he asks why you're late, say you had trouble finding the place. Try to look scared, but not hysterical. And Eleanor, he looked me in the eyes, his expression serious. Whatever happens in there, don't react impulsively. Trust me. He got out of the car and disappeared into the darkness like a shadow, moving with a surprising agility for a man of his age and build. Those 10 minutes of waiting were torture. Every second dragged, every sound of the night, the wind howling. Between the warehouses, a cat meowing in the distance. The distant sound of a siren made my heart leap into my throat. Finally, I took a deep breath, grabbed the bag with Vic's money, and got out of the car, my legs trembling like leaves. I walked towards the entrance of Warehouse 14, a huge, rusty, ajar metal door. The darkness inside was almost total, and a strong smell of mildew, rust, and something rotten hung in the air. Mark? I called out, my voice choked with fear. It's me, Eleanor. I brought the money. A flashlight beam emerged from the back of the warehouse, blinding me for an instant. Come in. And come slowly, Mark's voice sounded, tense and unstable. I entered, stumbling over debris on the floor. His flashlight beam danced around the vast, cavernous space. And then I saw her, Lily, tied to an old wooden chair in the center of the warehouse. She was pale, her eyes red and swollen from crying, but when she saw me, a spark of relief, or perhaps hope, flickered in her frightened eyes. My heart clenched in a way that almost took my breath away. Lily, are you okay, my love? I managed to say, my voice thick with emotion. The money! Mark yelled, the flashlight now focused on me, his other hand firmly gripping a gun that looked huge and menacing in his trembling grasp. Throw the bag on the floor, right in front of me. I did as he said, tossing the bag with Vic's money a few feet from him. There, Mark, the money's there. Now please let my daughter go. She has nothing to do with this. Oh, she has nothing to do with it. He laughed, a bitter, humorless laugh. She's the daughter of that scoundrel Richard, and you're the woman who lived off him for years while my family went bankrupt because of that bastard. You all have something to do with this. He approached the bag, kicking it angrily, but without taking his eyes, or the gun, off me and Lily. I know Richard wronged your family, Mark, I tried to reason, my voice as calm as I could manage. But revenge won't bring your father back. This won't fix anything. Take the money and go. Start a new life, please. He seemed to hesitate for an instant, the anger in his eyes giving way to a shadow of of pain and confusion. But it was only for an instant. The fury returned with full force. "Shut up! You don't know anything!" he screamed, waving the gun, waving the gun. It was at that moment that everything happened very quickly. From atop a pile of old, dusty boxes in a dark corner of the warehouse, I heard a noise, a small slip. Mark spun around pie-peatly towards the sound, and in that second of distraction, David leaped from the boxes like a cat, landing on Mark with surprising impact. The two of them rolled across the dirty floor, struggling for the gun. A shot rang out, the sound echoing through the warehouse like an explosion, making my heart stop for a moment. I screamed. Lily screamed. I saw David manage to immobilize Mark, twisting his arm and prying the gun from his hand with impressive skill. He was panting, but seemed okay. The shot, thankfully, had only hit a metal beam in the ceiling, but the confusion was far from over. Just as David was beginning to handcuff Mark with the old cuffs he'd brought, we heard the screech of tires outside the warehouse, followed by car doors slamming violently. And who should appear in the dark entrance of the warehouse? His face, red with fury, his eyes bloodshot with hatred, followed by two burly thugs with mean faces. Vic. He'd woken up sooner than I expected. The drug hadn't lasted as long as I'd imagined, and somehow, with his contacts and resources probably, the bastard had tracked me there. "You whore," he yelled, his voice echoing through the warehouse, his eyes fixed on me with murderous fury. "You thought you could rob me and get away with it, you bitch! You and your lover boy there." He pointed at David, who was getting up, alert. "You're going to pay, and with interest." And then the pandemonium truly began. Vic's goons advanced. One of them pulled a gun. David pushed me hard behind some old rusty boxes, yelling for me to protect Lily. I heard more shots, screams, the smell of gunpowder in the air. Chaos erupted. I was terrified, but the sight of Lily, still tied to the chair, completely vulnerable in the middle of that shootout, gave me a strength I didn't know I possessed. I had to do something. I had to save my daughter, and then the pandemonium truly began. Vic's goons advanced like rabid dogs. One of them, a large man with an ugly scar on his face, pulled out a short-barreled gun. David, with an impressive reflex, pushed me hard behind some old rusty boxes, which offered some precarious protection. "Protect Lily!" he yelled over the noise, as he himself tried to find cover, using the gun he had taken from Mark to return fire. I heard more shots, screams. The acrid smell of gunpowder filled the air, mixing with the odor of mildew and decay in the warehouse. Chaos erupted. I was paralyzed with fear, my heart beating so hard it felt like it would explode in my chest. But the sight of Lily, still tied to that wooden chair in the middle of the crossfire, completely vulnerable, her eyes wide with terror, gave me a jolt of adrenaline, a strength I didn't know I possessed. I had to do something. I had to get my daughter out of there. Taking advantage of a moment when the shots seemed to be coming from another direction, I ran crouched towards Lily, fear giving way to a protective fury. "Lily, my love, I'm going to get you out of here," I yelled, trying to untie the ropes binding her wrists, my hands trembling so much I could barely grip the knots. It was in that instant, in that moment of desperate vulnerability, that it happened. One of Vic's goons, the armed one, saw my movement. He aimed. I heard the dry crack of the shot. Almost at the same time I saw Lily arch her body forward with a sharp cry of pain, a sound that tore my soul. And then I saw the blood, a dark stain, beginning to spread rapidly on the light-colored blouse she wore, right around her stomach. "No!" The scream tore from me like a wounded animal, a howl of pure horror and despair. "Lily, my daughter!" I dropped the ropes and threw myself over her, trying to shield her with my own body, trying to staunch the blood that flowed hot and fast between my fingers. Her eyes were glazed, pain etched on her pale face. She moaned, a low, suffering sound. "Mom," she whispered, her voice weak. That wound on Lily changed everything. The confrontation, already desperate, became a race against time. David, seeing what had happened, seemed to gain a new, grim determination. He exposed himself more, firing with deadly precision, forcing Vic's goons to fall back for a moment. Mark, who was lying cuffed near a pillar, watched the scene with an expression of shock and perhaps even remorse, seeing the unintended consequence of his actions. Vic, the bastard, continued to shout orders to his men, furious at being robbed and now seeing his revenge complicate. But the sound of police sirens, which David, with veteran cunning, must have managed to discreetly call before all the confusion began, or during a lull in the shooting, began to approach, loud and clear, cutting through the night. The imminent arrival of the police made Vic's goons hesitate. One of them, the one who had shot Lily, tried to flee through the back door of the warehouse, but David was quicker and brought him down with a shot to the leg. The other, seeing the situation, was lost, dropped his weapon, and surrendered as the first uniformed police officers stormed the place, guns drawn, shouting, "Police! Hands up!" Vic, caught off guard by the rapid arrival of the police, still tried to argue, to say he was the victim there, that I had robbed him. But the scene of the shootout, the wounded, and Mark's cuffed presence told a very different story. He was quickly subdued and handcuffed as well. While the police controlled the situation, arresting the criminals and securing the area, all my attention was on Lily. She was losing a lot of blood. David rushed to us, tore a piece from his own shirt, and pressed it hard against the wound on her stomach, trying to stop the hemorrhage. "Hang on, Lily. Hang on, girl," he said, his voice tense but trying to convey some calm. "The ambulance is on its way." I held Lily's cold, pale hand, tears streaming down my face relentlessly, my body trembling uncontrollably. "You're going to be okay, my love," I repeated like a mantra, more to myself than to her. "You have to be okay. Please, my daughter, don't leave me." The paramedics arrived minutes later, an efficient, quick team. They placed Lily on a stretcher, started an IV, monitored her vital signs. The worried expressions on their faces didn't escape me. The wound was serious. As they rushed her to the ambulance, I tried to follow, but a police officer held me back. "Ma'am, we need your statement." "My daughter," I pleaded, despair consuming me. "I need to go with her," David intervened. "I'll go with her in the ambulance, Eleanor. I'm a doctor. You stay here, take care of what you need to. I'll keep you informed. She'll be okay. We'll take care of her." He looked me in the eyes, a silent promise in his tired but determined gaze. I nodded, too weak to argue. I watched the ambulance depart, its lights flashing in the darkness, taking my daughter, my Lily, between life and death. And there, amidst the dirt and chaos of that abandoned warehouse, surrounded by police and criminals, I felt more alone and terrified than ever. The hours that followed Lily's ambulance departure were a blur of interrogations, police formalities, and an icy emptiness that settled in my chest. I was taken to the police station, a cold, impersonal place, where I had to recount and re-recount the story of that terrible night, from the kidnapping to the shootout in the warehouse. Every word was an effort, every memory a stab. The officers were professional, but distant, jotting everything down in their notepads, asking questions that sometimes seemed to imply I was somehow at fault, had some obscure part in all that mess. I explained about Richard, about Mark's debt, about my desperate attempt to get the ransom money from Vic. I omitted, out of sheer shame and fear of being judged even more, the sordid details of exactly how I convinced Vic to give me the money. I just said he had an obsession with me and that I had manipulated him to get the sum. Whether they believed me or not, I couldn't say. David called a few times from the hospital waiting room, his voice tense but trying to reassure me. Lily had been taken directly to the operating room. The bullet had hit her abdomen, and there was a risk of severe internal injuries. The wait for news was slow, agonizing torture. Every minute dragged on like an hour. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I was released from the police station with the recommendation not to leave the city and to remain available for further questioning. I took a taxi. I no longer had a car, no longer had anything, and went straight to the hospital. I found David in the ICU waiting room, his face pale and gaunt, the dark circles under his eyes even deeper than when I had re-encountered him. He stood up as soon as he saw me. "Eleanor," he said, his voice low, tired. "The surgery is over. It was complicated. She lost a lot of blood, and the projectile caused some damage to her uterus and part of her intestine." My heart stopped. Uterus. The doctors managed to control the hemorrhage and repair what was possible, but her condition is still serious. She's in the ICU, sedated. The next few hours are crucial. Those words hit me like a punch. Uterus. My Lily, so young. The possibility of long-term consequences, of never being able to have children. The cruel irony of fate, considering what I would later discover about her fears and secrets. But at that moment, the only thing that mattered was that she survived. She survived. "Can I see her?" I asked, my voice a wisp. "In a little while, just for a few minutes," he replied. "She needs to rest." We sat side by side in that old, silent waiting room, each lost in our own thoughts and anxieties. David told me in more detail how he had managed to discreetly alert the police before entering the warehouse, using a code he knew from his time on the force. He spoke about the forensics at the scene, about the arrest of Vic and his goons, and of Mark, who, he said, seemed more like a scared, desperate kid than a cold-blooded criminal. As we waited, news of the case began to pop up on internet portals. And local TV news. Shootout in Port Area warehouse leaves one critically injured, well-known businessman arrested in police operation. Foiled rescue attempt ends in confrontation. My name, Lily's, Richard's, Vic's. Everything was being exposed, dissected by public curiosity. The shame was another layer of suffering. It was during this agonizing wait that some pieces of the puzzle began to fit together, or rather, to fall apart in even more disturbing ways. A detective who was investigating Richard's case, the fraud, the bigamy, showed up at the hospital. He wanted to talk to me, to take advantage of my being there. With a choked voice, I told him about Mark's call, about the debt he claimed Richard owed his family. The detective took notes, his eyes attentive. He told me they were already investigating several suspicious transactions in Richard's companies, and that Mark's story could open a new line of investigation into older scams. And it was this same name. Detective who, almost casually, asked me a question that chilled me to the bone. Mrs. Eleanor, your ex-husband, Richard, did he have any involvement in the death of your first husband, Robert, your daughter's father? I heard some rumors at the time, but nothing was ever proven. The question caught me by surprise. Robert. My Robert. His death in that horrible car accident, with Richard at the wheel, had always been treated as a tragic fatality. Never. Not. Even in my worst nightmares, had I considered another possibility. No, of course not, I replied, perhaps more vehemently than necessary. It was a terrible accident. Richard was his best friend. He suffered a lot too. The detective looked at me for a moment, an unreadable expression, and changed the subject. But that seed of doubt, that unsettling question, was planted in my mind, mingling with the anguish over Lily's health. Later that night, a former coworker from my previous job, the one I was fired from after the accident with my hand, appeared at the hospital. He was one of the few who still kept in touch and had heard about the shootout from the press. He came to offer support, and it was he who, in a low, indignant voice, told me the truth about my accident at the company. It hadn't been an accident. Brenda, that envious colleague who was always taking jabs at me, had deliberately sabotaged the shelf where the toolbox was. She knew, through an affair she was having with one of the managers, that the big shot, the important investor, was coming to the company that day specifically to meet with me, and that a great opportunity was at stake. Brenda, with her boundless ambition, had set everything up to get me out of the way and try to snatch the opportunity for herself. And she succeeded. While I was in the hospital with my injured hand, lamenting having missed the meeting, she had introduced herself to the investor, used her charm, and apparently other attributes, and ended up getting the position or project that should have been mine. My dismissal, under the guise of restructuring, had merely been the final consequence of that sordid setup. Each new piece of information was like another nail in my coffin of miseries. Betrayed, robbed, assaulted, unemployed due to sabotage, and now my daughter fighting for her life because of the greed and malice of men who had crossed our paths, and the shadow of a terrible doubt about the death of my first love. I looked at David, who was dozing uncomfortably in the chair beside me, exhausted but still there, steadfast. He was at that moment the only anchor of sanity in the storm that threatened to drown me. Finally, a nurse appeared and said I could see Lily, but only for a few minutes. I entered the ICU, my heart in my hand. Seeing her there, pale, intubated, surrounded by machines beeping rhythmically, was one of the most painful sights of my life. I held her hand, which was cold, and whispered in her ear that I loved her, that she needed to be strong, that everything would be okay. Tears streamed down my face uncontrollably. I stayed there until the nurse gently asked me to leave. I returned to the waiting room, my chest heavy, my soul in pieces, and prepared myself for another long night of vigil and uncertainty. The days that followed were a roller coaster of anguish and small sparks of hope. I practically moved into that hospital waiting room, taking turns with David for uncomfortable naps in the hard chairs. He became my rock, my constant companion in that painful vigil. He brought coffee, something for me to eat, talked to me to distract me from the anxiety, or simply sat in silence beside me, his presence and our old friendship conveying a quiet strength that helped me not to completely fall apart. Lily underwent another surgery to repair internal damage and remove shrapnel. Her recovery was slow, painful. She was still very weak, but the doctors began to show cautious optimism. Gradually, they reduced the sedation, and finally, after days that felt like an eternity, she opened her eyes and recognized me. The relief I felt at that moment was so intense that my legs buckled, and I had to lean on her bed to keep from falling. "Mom," she whispered, her voice weak, almost inaudible. "I'm sorry." Tears streamed down her face, and mine too. There in that hospital room, with the smell of antiseptic and the constant sound of monitors, we began, fragilely and hesitantly, to try to piece together our shattered relationship. While Lily fought for her life, the world outside continued to turn. The investigations into Richard deepened. The police discovered he had a complex network of shell companies, offshore accounts, and a growing list of victims of his financial scams. Mark's story and the debt Richard owed his family set a precedent for other people harmed by him to come forward, to report him. With each new discovery, Richard's image became more monstrous, more calculating. David, with his keen investigative instinct, and now with a personal interest in bringing justice for me and for Robert's memory, hadn't forgotten the detectives. Question. He began to use his old police contacts, to rummage through dusty files, to search for any clue that could shed light on that accident from so many years ago. At first, I hesitated. It was too painful to revisit that past, to desecrate Robert's memory with such terrible suspicions. But a part of me, the part that had been deceived and manipulated by Richard for so long, needed to know the truth, however terrible it might be. Eventually, David's investigations, cross-referenced with the police's findings on Richard's other crimes, brought the brutal truth to light. Richard had sabotaged Robert's Robert's car, aiming for the life insurance money and probably already coveting me. Amidst all this turmoil, an unexpected visit to the hospital brought a new element to our already complicated situation. A young man, looking a bit sheepish and holding a simple bouquet of flowers, appeared at Lily's room door, asking permission to enter. It was Lucas, the Uber driver who had taken me to the hospital on the day of my accident and driven me home. Right after, he had seen the news about the shootout and Lily's name in the papers, and somehow connected the dots, remembering me, my distress, and his own comment about blood donation. He came to offer his support, his solidarity. Lily, who was already a little more conscious, managed a weak smile when she saw him. They had met briefly a few weeks before my accident, by chance, at a diner, and had exchanged a few words, a few glances. Nothing serious, but there was a mutual liking there. Lucas began to visit her regularly at the hospital, bringing magazines, telling funny stories to cheer her up. He was a breath of fresh air in that heavy atmosphere, a gentle, unpretentious presence that did Lily good, and me too, I confess. It was during one of these visits, as doctors discussed Lily's progress and the need for future interventions to fully repair the internal damage, that a complication arose. One of the organs affected by the bullet, part of her reproductive system, was severely compromised and might require a transplant in the future for her to have any chance of a completely normal life, or even to realize her dream of becoming a mother, something that, to my surprise and emotion, she confessed she still cherished, despite everything. The news was a blow. The waiting list for a compatible donor was long, the chances uncertain. It was then that Lucas, who was present during the conversation, shyly offered to undergo compatibility tests, mentioning again that he was an organ and blood donor. "I don't know if it helps," he said, blushing slightly, "but if I can help in any way." At first, we thought it was just a gesture of goodwill, but the doctors agreed to run the tests, and the result, a few days later, left us all astounded, with a mixture of shock and an almost unbelievable hope. Lucas was compatible, perfectly compatible, a statistical rarity, a coincidence bordering on a miracle, but one that somehow seemed predestined since that comment in the car. The news spread through the hospital. The young man who was almost a stranger, the Uber driver fate had placed in my path twice on the same day, now emerged as a possible salvation for my daughter. The irony of life, with its twists and turns, had never seemed so evident, so powerful. As Lily slowly recovered, and the possibility of a future transplant with Lucas's help hung in the air like a fragile promise, the investigations into Richard and Robert's death concluded, bringing to light all the dark secrets and revelations that, though painful, began to pave the way for some kind of justice. And my relationship with David, forged in crisis, in the complicity of pain, and in the rediscovery of an old friendship, was beginning to transform into something deeper, something I hadn't expected, but that perhaps was exactly what I needed to start healing my own wounds. The months that followed Lily's recovery and Richard's imprisonment were a period of slow, painful rebuilding, but also of rediscovery and an unexpected strengthening of our bonds. Lily, with Lucas's unconditional support, flourished. Therapy helped her process the traumas, and the genuine love she found with Lucas was a balm for old wounds. They were building a life together, step by step, with a maturity that filled me with pride. The investigation into Richard and his multiple frauds, including his direct and premeditated involvement in Robert's death, resulted in a long sentence. He would pay for every life he destroyed. David, my rediscovered friend and now my partner, was tireless in his pursuit of truth and justice, using his contacts and experience to ensure Richard did not go unpunished. Our friendship, born amidst chaos, deepened, transforming into a relationship of complicity, respect, and a serene love I didn't think I'd be capable of feeling again. As for the others involved in that web of horrors, Brenda, my envious ex-colleague, faced legal and professional consequences for her sabotage, her career tarnished by greed. Mark, Lily's ex-boyfriend, received a sentence that took into account the mitigating circumstances of his story, his own victimization by Richard, and the desperation that led him to commit that act. There was hope that he might one day start over, and Vic, the disgusting club client, would rot in jail for a long time, paying for his crimes and for crossing my path on that fateful night. Roxy, my loyal friend, continued to be my pillar, living proof that true friendship transcends all prejudice. 2 years passed since the climax of that whole ordeal. Life had found a new rhythm, a new melody, softer, more hopeful. David and I were building a life together, learning to trust again, to love again. Lily and Lucas were closer than ever, their love and inspiration. It was at one of those Sunday lunches in my small, cozy house, a place I had earned with my own sweat, and that represented my new beginning, that the conversation took an unexpected turn. Lily, after a long sigh and a complicit glance at Lucas, turned to me, her eyes shining with a mixture of anxiety and an almost palpable hope. "Mom," she began, her voice a little shaky but firm. confirm. Lucas and we've been talking a lot about the future, about family. She reached for Lucas's hand, which he held warmly, encouraging her to continue. You know, since the shooting, the doctors were very clear. I can't get pregnant. The risk would be too high for me and the baby because of the damage that was done. And this time, Mom, she looked at me with painful sincerity. I know it's true. Not like the horrible lies Richard used to fill my head with to manipulate me and keep me tied to him, making me believe I'd never be able to have a real family without him. My heart ached hearing those words, seeing the shadow of sadness and the memory of manipulation cross my daughter's face, even for an instant. I knew how much she dreamed of being a mother, despite everything she had been through. But we haven't given up on that dream, Mom, Lucas intervened, his voice gentle but full of conviction. We've researched all the options. Adoption, surrogacy, and we've come to a conclusion. Lily took a deep breath, her eyes fixed on mine, filled with an emotion that made me hold my breath. Mom, we wanted to know if you would consider being our surrogate, carrying our baby. The request hung in the air, heavy and yet incredibly light. I looked at her, my daughter, who had suffered so much, who had erred so much, but who was there before me, seeking a way to realize her greatest dream with a newfound maturity. I looked at Lucas, a good, kind-hearted young man who loved my daughter unconditionally and was willing to build a family with her, despite all obstacles. And I looked at David, my partner, who was watching me with a tender smile, his eyes conveying silent, unwavering support, whatever my decision might be. All my pain, all my losses, Richard's betrayal, the horror of that night, the fight for survival, everything seemed to converge in that moment. But not as a burden crushing me, but as the journey that had shaped me, that had taught me about the depth of my own strength, about the capacity to love in ways I never imagined. A smile, the most genuine, serene, and love-filled smile I could offer, bloomed on my lips, dispelling any shadow of doubt that might have lingered in my mind. Yes, I said, my voice choked with emotion but clear as crystal. Yes, my daughter. Yes, Lucas. Of course, yes. The words came out with a certainty that sprang from the deepest part of my soul, a certainty that this was the right path, the most precious gift I could give them. It will be the greatest, most beautiful honor of my life to bring your child into the world. The tears that welled in Lily's eyes were no longer of sadness or guilt, but of a happiness so pure, so radiant, that it lit up the entire room. Lucas hugged her tightly, his face buried in her hair, too emotional to utter a single word. Then he turned to me, his eyes misty, and managed only to whisper, "Thank you, Eleanor. From the bottom of my heart, thank you," before giving me an awkward but heartfelt hug, full of a gratitude that touched me deeply. David squeezed my hand even tighter, pride and love shining in his gaze, a look that said he was there, by my side, on this new and extraordinary journey. In the months that followed, we began the whole medical process, consultations, an endless battery of tests, physical and emotional preparations. It was a journey shared by all four of us, full of expectations, of small, natural fears, but above all, of a family bond that strengthened and reinvented itself every day. And then, after a few attempts and much anticipation, the news we all awaited with bated breath. The in vitro fertilization procedure had been a success. I was pregnant. Pregnant with my grandchild. Pregnant with Lily and Lucas's biological child. The feeling was indescribable. A mixture of joy, responsibility, and an overflowing love. Carrying that new life within me, knowing it was the fruit of my daughter's love and the man who made her so happy, was a gift. A miracle that seemed to heal the deepest wounds of my soul. With every ultrasound, every beat of that tiny heart that I listened to with teary eyes, emotion overwhelmed us all. Lily and Lucas were pure happiness, actively participating in every moment, caring for me with a tenderness and attention that made me feel like the most loved woman in the world. David was my tireless companion, my safe harbor, my accomplice, celebrating with me every stage of this new and surprising adventure life had in store for us. The 9 months passed like a breath, amidst anxious preparations, shared dreams, and a growing, sweet anticipation. And then the long-awaited day arrived, with Lily and Lucas by my side in the delivery room, holding my hands, their voices giving me strength and affection, and with David waiting anxiously outside, I brought a beautiful, strong, healthy baby boy into the world. Their baby, my grandson, the fruit of love and hope, placing that tiny, perfect, long-awaited being into Lily's trembling arms, seeing the pure, overwhelming emotion on her face as she held him for the first time, seeing Lucas openly weeping with happiness beside her, kissing the forehead of his son and the woman he loved, was, without a shadow of a doubt, the most rewarding, most fulfilling, most significant moment of my entire life. There, in that sacred instant, all the suffering, all the pain of the past seemed to dissolve, giving way to an indescribable peace and joy, a sense of a completed cycle. My story had begun with the excruciating pain of a devastating devastating betrayal, with the discovery that the man I shared my life with was betraying me with my own daughter. But through the unbelievable and often incomprehensible turns life takes, it was ending with me there, united with them in a new, unexpected, and even deeper way, generating the next generation, being the vessel of their love and hope. I had, yes, come home early and discovered the horror, but in the end, I had found redemption and a new, extraordinary purpose in the most generous act of love I could offer. And yes, I became pregnant, not in the scandalous way the initial phrase might suggest, but carrying in my womb, with all the love in the world, the precious fruit of Lily and Lucas's love, my grandchild. And this, with all its twists and turns, its sorrows and its surprising joys, was my story. A story of a fall, of much struggle, but above all, of an extraordinary new beginning, and of a love that, in the end, always wins. Always wins.